as an industry, we're moving more towards running mechanics. So people are starting to talk about it. Whereas I think when you and I met, which was probably over a year ago now,
Yep.
even at that time, there were few people, like everybody knows what ground contact is, right? And people have heard Stu McMillan speak or read Ken Clark's papers, triangular velocity. So that's there, but people really starting to look at the integration. I reckon that's starting to happen now, independent of technology. So then people are starting to say, well, okay, if I understand these things, how can we measure that? And they're looking for a solution. So I'm meeting people more and more recently who once you meet them, they've actually already got a strong picture in their mind of what they're trying to achieve, which is it's not what it was 2 years ago. It wasn't like that at all.
Well, I mean, the field as a whole, we have a PhD in the weight room and a GED on the field, right? Like that is 100% the case. But now it does seem like when platforms that Strength Coach Network was, when Kier first had it and why I was attracted to it, it was like, hey, this is what actually moves the needle. So the more that people are continuing to talk about it, the more people realize that it is important because it is. And if coaches that are listening to this have been neglecting it, you need to get out there on the field. You need to understand what your athletes are doing because that's 90% of the time where they're getting hurt. They're not getting hurt in the weight room.
And that's the thing. You see this all the time. I had a conversation the other day with a big university in the States, and they said, listen, I was talking to their sports science guy, and he said, listen, if I can't get this on the field, and we're actually talking about hip lock, he was saying, well, how could I do it in the gym? And I said, well, that's kind of the whole picture, is that once you start thinking about your athletes as runners, because that's what they all do. They all have to run. They all have to be on their feet. Now, I know when you go offensive line and that sort of thing, you've got guys really pushing up against one another, but everyone has to run. So you have to, in my opinion, with our field sport athletes, and I think I became a better coach when I really started thinking about them as runners, not as, tackling machines or blunt instruments of force. Really starting to concentrate on how they run, and then what can I do? What choices can I make in the weight room that support that activity?
The thing that I wrote down right there is, all right, what would you say to the strength coach? It's like, all right, well, I work with, field hockey. I work with lacrosse where we're running, but we're running with an implement.
Oh, lacrosse is awesome. And I've just been probably this last couple of months having some chats with the Australian lacrosse scene, having a look at what's going on. And I actually work with, at the moment, just as a side hustle, some pole vaulters, some very, very good Olympic level pole vaulters. And the same thing, you're running with an implement lateral to your body. So I think what you've got to do, like from my perspective, what I've tried to do in the industry with SpeedSig is understand the first principle of running. Can the athlete run in a straight line, and can they generate and control speed well? Because the gap we come from the gym and we do all these magnificent things in the gym, and then we jump straight to the field. It's like there's got to be a step in the middle where we understand the fundamentals of running. Can they run well? If they run really well, straight line, they can generate speed, they can decelerate. Then when we go to curvilinear running, or we change direction, or we carry an implement, those things become easier and easier. And I don't ever claim, I had a conversation with an NFL team the other day, and they were kind of hesitant on us. And then they went from 0 to 100 in 1 second. They said, oh, we want to measure it on the field in the game. I said, slow down. Like, that's really complicated. Like, to actually measure mechanics in the game, I'd love to say we can get there one day, but bring it back a step. We're trying to just bridge the gap between what we're doing in the weights room and then what we're doing in rehabilitation and what we're doing with, you go to that NFL level and I'm telling you, everybody's got an injury. Everybody's overcome something. No one's out there fresh as a daisy, right? They're all carrying an old ankle. They're all carrying a groin, a hamstring, something. We need to, if we can remove the roadblocks around some of those things, then our athletes are more sustainable, more resilient, more robust, and perform better.
Yeah, and that's a governing principle, regardless whether or not there's an implement in your hand.
Correct. I think the implement becomes secondary. I think you've got a great old coach in Australia, or England and Australia, a guy named Kelvin Giles, used to always say to me, like, just first principles, get the basics down pat, right? Great mentor. And I think that's what we're endeavoring to do. Let's understand how athletes move. Now, what's interesting, you bring up lacrosse. I think when you look at American football, you have more runners that are relatively homogenous. By that I mean they are they're a closer relationship to track and field than the further you move away. Like, they're a genuine speed power sport. Lacrosse, you go to football or soccer, the rugby codes, AFL in Australia, their running becomes a little bit different. So then not everybody runs exactly the same, because not everyone's trying to generate or can generate as high a speed. So we can have players in the AFL that might run 14, 15 kilometres. They weigh 90 kilograms. They're 6'4", and they don't run like sprinters, but they run exceptionally well. We need to be able to understand how to help them. Now, obviously, AFL is not an American sport, but lacrosse, soccer, the MLS is getting much bigger. The MLS is rapidly growing in the US. So trying to understand those sports. I actually saw a shot the other day of one of the safeties from the Patriots went and played rugby sevens. So there you go. There's a guy who changed up massive, and he was awesome, I got to say. Like, what I would say, if I take that as an example, Justin, I think he was a first principle great athlete. And you just took him from American football to sevens rugby, which is a whole different world. But the qualities he brought across as just a fundamental athlete were just fantastic. The clips I saw were, I think he scored a try with his first touch. Very impressive.
So then the question that I think our listeners might be asking is, like, all right, if we're going to be implementing this, we're going to be measuring in the rehab setting, and we're going to be seeing what goes on in training. And you talked about the word curvilinear before. I had Dave Kern on before. He was on before I was on with you, and Dave talked a lot about curvilinear and how you can't run a curve in a certain number of steps, a minimal, like the minimum is 5 to make it an actual curve, because it's lateral forces applied to the ground, not turning when you run. Talk about how SpeedSig can help with any of the curvilinear running or any of that type of mechanics.
Well, I think as a precursor, so it's no different if you revert it back to the weight room, which your listeners have probably got a lot more experience with, is in order to squat heavy and to squat really, if you want to put up a 600-pound squat, you got to squat 200 pounds first and then 300. So you got to get the basics down pat. So understanding an athlete's straight line running. So for instance, I had an NFL player, and actually have the data on a PowerPoint if you'd like to have a look, but we had an athlete with a quad strain. And when the NFL, my team, brought the information, they said, hey, we've got this guy, he's got a big quad strain. Can you have a look at his data and see what you think?
Get CEUs faster, cheaper, and more convenient than ever before with Strength Coach Network. Hey, it's Justin, here to tell you about how Strength Coach Network can now help you out with our premium membership and CEUs to the NSCA and CSCCa. Upon signing up for our premium membership, you will get 2.0 or 10 CEUs immediately. That is an entire year's worth of CEUs that you are able to access from the convenience of your office. No traveling for conferences, no waiting on flights, no eating out, no expensive hotels. Just the good stuff from great coaches. Now, if you need extra CEUs for past years during the reporting period, we can bundle Fundamentals 1 or 2, which also come with 2.0 or 10 CEUs to your purchase. That way you're able to take care of your CEUs for the best price, most convenient, and learn from some of the best coaches. If you want more help with this, email us at service@strengthcoachnetwork or visit us at strengthcoachnetwork.com, and I would be delighted to help you out.
And so I had a look, and yes, you could see some signal that would indicate a quad strain, which means they lose their vertical force. But a bigger signal was his right leg. And I said, like, have you guys looked at his right leg? Is there a history there that's we don't know about, or that you guys haven't addressed. Anyway, they go and look up his records. Sure enough, 2 years previous, when he was in college, he'd had a massive right ankle surgery. And I said, well, I think you've got to have a look at the fact that this guy cannot project. So he cannot, when we look at running, you've got that pull to the ground. So you have a vertical force and you have an anterior posterior force. The anterior posterior force, nowhere near as strong as the vertical, but it's still a big component of how we run. JB Moran showed that. This kid couldn't produce it off his right leg. So his left leg is almost like a skateboard or a scooter. He's having to pull on one leg. And so if we start talking to that guy, that athlete was, I believe, an outside offensive lineman, so running the curves. So he can't run a curve if he can't run straight. You want to get him running straight well and controlled first, then teach him, get him on the curves. So he's got a limitation in straight line running. So I think the concept that SpeedSig tries to work with is fundamental running. How do they run in the first place? If we get that squared away, then layering on all the skills your previous guest talked about curvilinear running, about how we drop the shoulder, about all the types of things. I had a magnificent conversation with the great Dan Pfaff. I was privileged to have a couple of hours with him last week. And what did we look at? We looked at amputee athletes, because you can learn so much from an amputee because they generate force differently. And then you add these unbelievable prosthetics that then have a different category of force on the ground. They're so rapid on the ground, but they still create a torsion in the torso. I'm actually doing some work at the moment with an amputee triathlete, so a young lass who's lost an arm pretty much from the shoulder. And so when we're trying to get her to run, in triathlon, they're trying to run a 5K, and this girl, because she's got one arm, her best leg, so to speak, her best event, part of the event, is the run. So she's going to run people down. She needs to run quick. So how do we run quick when there's no arm drive? And we've got those opposing forces. We've got that pepper grind, that rotary force. So we need to understand how we can counterbalance that. Again, we bring that back to fundamental running. Before you start running a curve, you want to be really strong at stabilizing those forces in a linear fashion. So I think that's where we're at. I don't for a second say we're about curvilinear running, but I think the fundamentals of athletic development are get you running, get your acceleration, get your top speed in a straight line correct, and then all the other things become much, much easier.
You just teed up my next question about acceleration versus max velocity. A lot of this might be over we have aspiring young strength coaches in middle of the road and some directors. So there's a gambit of coaches, and anybody that's listening right now, this man's been doing it since 1998 when you go and you check his bio. Like, he's been doing this a while, had not been only working with SpeedSig. We'll get into your bio and we'll get into your history a little bit later on. Talk about acceleration, max velocity, some of these key, we're getting more and more aware about it, but I talked about curvilinear before I went to max V and acceleration. So let's back it up and let's go back there. Yeah,
well, I think particularly when we talk about SpeedSig, so what SpeedSig does is we take the units that guys are using, the catapult or the stats boards. We all colloquially call them GPS units, but they're inertial motion sensors, right? So they got accelerometers, gyroscopes, magnetometers. So we take that unit and we put it in a special belt and we mount it on the lumbar spine. So what that means is we then start to understand the body's estimated center of mass and how that moves. So then if you go to first principles, before we start trying to diagnose or to try and read data, first principles, the things we know about running require vertical force and anterior posterior force. So the two key elements of kinetics. First, most important starting point. From there, we go to the kinematic variables, of which ground contact is one. Ground contact can be driven by our kinetic forces, but then all the kinematics around step length, step length, step frequency. Then you have your thigh angular velocities, your flight time, your ground contact time, all of those pieces. Right. So then we've got how do our limbs move through space and time and create the position for us to exert force on the ground. So that works in acceleration and in top speed. So the ability to understand those fundamental principles and then how we maximize them. So how do we maximize them for the athlete? All right, so that's what we try to do with SpeedSig, is to bring those variables into a methodology where we can measure them for coaches. We can provide feedback on the field. And by using those inertial, the GPS sensors that everybody's wearing, it's a viable way for us to do it. So one of our college teams at the moment, we're measuring about 93 athletes every Friday afternoon, all at once. So they'll do 5 reps, everybody measured, data gets downloaded, and we process it, and it's ready for reporting and reading the next day. No problem.
Within those 93 athletes, that's a lot. Now you talked about whether it's StatSport, GPS, or Catapult. So there's already stuff that's going on. What are some of the main metrics that you're telling coaches, hey, look at this one before you look at this one, and it's sort of a hierarchy of, all right, when you have it, this is where you need to start.
Right. So the way we teach it is that we start with ground contact first, ground contact time. GCT sits between the big kinetic rocks of vertical and horizontal force and the kinematic variables of particularly stride length, stride frequency, and the like. And so there's a push-pull relationship between them. Peter Wayne demonstrated everything about vertical force. JB Moran told us about anterior-posterior. But Ken Clark more recently has been the one leading the charge, saying, well, if we reposition the foot and we get it into place quickly, and we can get it to the ground fast, which is thigh angular velocity, it changes the way we apply force to the ground. So when we talk to coaches, we say, and the way we work through our system is very simple. GCT first. We're looking for 2 things. Ideally left to right balance, but we're also looking for how does it measure up against normative data? So is it low, is it high? Now, all of our data is measured across velocity. We don't just take a maximum rep. We'll measure it through warm-ups. We'll get 60, 70, 80, 90%. So we model our athletes across speed. Because what I want to know incredibly, this is the center of everything I've done for the last decade, is how does the athlete's strategies change with speed? Right? We know from research that around about 7 meters per second, maybe a little bit slower in field sport athletes, we get the change of muscle contraction types. Right? We get different patterns in muscle contraction, recruitment, in sprinting. So we want to understand, does that change for people? Do people become more stride length dependent or more stride frequency? Are they still able, as JB Moran would say, are they still able to generate horizontal force as they are working at high speeds? That's what he talks about, that decay of horizontal versus vertical forces. So understanding those principles and starting from ground contact time. So we go ground contact time, then we go into kinetics.
What's up, everybody? Taking a quick break from the show to talk about one of our sponsors, TeamBuildr. I've been using TeamBuildr since 2019 when I was at Towson. I still use it with my remote athletes. I also use it at Goldfinch, which is the private sector gym I train at, and we use it at Centennial, which is the high school that I'm working at. Now, if you're printing on lift cards because you say, oh, I can't afford TeamBuildr, guess what? TeamBuildr has a pre-written grant that you can locate on their website. You simply change the name of you, your organization, and the areas that they highlighted, and they can help you get TeamBuildr at your facility, your university, whatever it is, so that way you can optimize how you train your athletes with this software. Now, TeamBuildr is also a part owner in the Plyomat. The Plyomat is something that I utilize at Goldfinch, and it helps you be able to see how high somebody jumped, the ground contact time, and RSI. You can get all that conveniently right there. You can reach out to your rep from TeamBuildr to be able to get more information on the Plyomat. It's fast, it's reliable, it's convenient, and it's trusted by coaches worldwide. Check them out as well as TeamBuildr in the link down below.
Are the horizontal and vertical same thing? Are they equal left to right? Are they normal against the population? If you start to see differences, then we start to ask questions. Where's that coming from? So when we see the guy that I talked about before, the NFL lineman, we could see on his left leg that his horizontal forces were quite good. So he was pulling on the ground, but his right leg wasn't. And as it turns out, he'd had an ankle reconstruction 2 years previous, which the current staff were not aware of. But an ankle reconstruction, what we've seen time and time again, athletes don't want to bring the foot to the ground. So what they do is they'll come up into front side. And if you're watching this, you can see me run with my fingers. They come into front side and then that leg just goes soft to the ground. They don't want to slam that ankle back into the ground. Now, that's not strength. That's motor control. That's the athlete losing a pattern. I was working this morning with a basketball girl in Australia from coming off an ACL reconstruction. Right? And we're working on that, sustaining or eliminating that valgus moment of the femur. And she said, oh, how do I get stronger? I said, I don't think you need to get stronger. You're strong enough. What you don't have is your motor pattern's fallen away. How long were you on crutches for? She said, whatever, 3-4 weeks. How long does it take to develop a new pattern? It takes less than 21 days to develop a new habit. So she's already developed a bad habit because of the injury. So what I'm saying, what we see in rehab all the time in running, we see guys get strong enough, but we don't do enough running on the field to get the skill back. Now, it's interesting, I saw an article the other day about drilling. Are running drills relevant? I think when you're looking in a rehab space, 100% they are, because you want to take every opportunity you have to retrain that brain to do the things you need to do. If you've got that ankle reconstruction, getting it back to the ground, that Ken Clark, thigh angular velocity, get that foot back to the ground quickly. You get it in the right place. Once you get it in the right place, your body's ability to exert vertical and anterior posterior forces is so much better. But if you let it drag, if you let that foot flop out in front, you end up with that a much bigger ground contact time.
You brought up something that I had talked about with a prior coworker of mine. He's the basketball strength coach at Towson, but he's also the track and field strength coach because he ran track at VCU. So Amit, appreciate you. I know you're listening to this right now. One of the things that we would always go back and forth with when we were either watching track practice or getting ready for the track lift is how much is enough mechanic work with team sport athletes if you're only dosing it, like we said, in the warm-up. Let's say warm-ups are on the long side, 15 minutes. How long of it is actual running mechanics work? Are they exposed to enough of it in weeks, months, right? Like to actually make a change. And my argument was yes, over the lifespan of the athlete, yes, in the macro, but also in the micro, because you're eventually going to work that motor pattern that you talked about with the learning. I want you to talk about it from your experience and what you've seen as a coach and with SpeedSig.
So I guess to talk a little bit about my background, I've been very fortunate to be what I call a generational coach. That means I worked in 2 sports for just over a decade in each. So that means I saw athletes from the start of their career all the way to the end. So there's 2 things. I think, yes, if you get them early, yes, you can teach them. There are going to be people that don't want to learn, without question. Right? And they're going to be maybe people that are really difficult to coach for a number of reasons. I don't convey a message that they can understand, but I think you can make a change. I think you can make a change, as you suggested, over the long term. I think when you look at injured athletes, you most definitely can make a difference. And if I take the SpeedSig example, one example that was from rugby union, international rugby union, but will be very close to the American football psyche, is the Achilles tendon rupture. Right? I brought a guy back just before the last Rugby World Cup, and we'll bring him back, and he was working directly with a physiotherapist in rehab, and I was kind of just data support, but they kept ringing me to ask me what I thought. And what we saw was this kid increase his strength in the gym, and it all looked good, all the isometric data, everything looked really cool. And the physio said, right, we're ready to go to full speed. And this kid was running already about 7 meters per second. And he was probably 9.4, 9.5. He's not electric, but he's fast enough. And so he probably had another good 15% to go. And I said, just slow down. We can see the 7 meter per second data is still long enough. So with an Achilles tendon, we see a loss of vertical force production. So we could see that it was still off by about 20%. But his strength in the gym had come back up to parity. So what we were able to say was, take our time. Let's work at 7, build it up. It only took us about another 14 days to let it come through. He got through to maximum after about 14 days. And I think he went to about 93% left to right on the vertical force. Never regained full because the tendon was ruptured. He still got back to good speed. But I think from a SpeedSig perspective, we're able to add that don't rush component because we can see the data moving. Just take your time. Too often we see in repeat injuries, and I've made this mistake, and you've got to remember, anyone listening to me, that you're talking to the guy who's made more mistakes than anybody. And so, I created SpeedSig to try and identify where I was going wrong. And I think if you can see that, we had a great story from last year in the Australian Football League back here in Australia. We had a player did a big hamstring a couple of weeks before the finals. Doctor went off his brain, said, no, that's it, he's out altogether, he won't play again this year. The guy who was running the high performance team just said, no, let's slow down, let's just do one thing at a time. Let's get him into treatment. Let's walk him in the next day. They did that. The scan was horrible, but the kid came in and he had full range of motion. So it's not too bad. Then they just worked through it. And then they got to the point where they said, look, if we get him back on the field, we've got 6 months of SpeedSig data. He'll come back. We'll be able to see if he's equal. Sure enough, they brought him back and they worked him through just one step at a time. They got him back to play finals. The kid played finals without a problem. He came back in 3 weeks when it was like the doctor saying, you're done, not playing again this year. But the point of that is that it's just one more data point. SpeedSig's meant to be one data point that complements all the things we're already doing really well. But our industry has come forward so fast, right? It has been now, since the first time I heard the words monitoring, which was around about 2002. So we're at 23 years. We've come a long way. But my contention is that we need to keep moving because we have GPS, because we have eccentric hamstring, because we have force plates. That's not everything. We need to keep looking at the next thing. We've already talked about curvilinear running. Unquestionably, that's another level. But that's another level that's going to have to come on top of what I'm doing.
One of the questions that I'm thinking, and maybe our listeners are, is there a specific linear protocol that you need to come up with when you're looking at this in terms of the running data? And the reason I'm asking this is whether you had Catapult, you had Stat Sports, if you wanted to figure out your asymmetries, they would tell you, hey, you got to just be running straight ahead. You can't be using like game data to figure out your asymmetry. Unless that has changed, somebody can tell me otherwise. When I last used it, that's what I was told. Is there a specific protocol that matters, or can it just continue to capture and you just need to know how to filter it out when you're using it?
So with SpeedSig, the limit of our methodology is the unit has to be mounted on your lumbar spine. So from the thoracic spine, there's too much noise. We can't discern the information we need. So the lumbar mount is one thing. The second part is we need a dwell window of about 3 seconds. So typically we'd say it's about a 40-yard effort, probably just over, we'd say 20 to 40 meters in Australia, so it's probably 50 yards. Athlete accelerates up, holds their speed, and then comes out. So that's why we talk about capturing data in warm-ups, because we're going to profile every speed. We're going to profile them at 60, 70, 80. But because we're linearly modeling it, you don't have to run 6.5 meters per second. You could run 6.7, 6.2, because we're just going to plot that. So all of our data is plotted linearly against velocity. So we create this linear model for both limbs. So that protocol is really like when you're doing OTAs and things like that, where you're doing some straight line running, we capture all of that. And then if you get, some of our teams will use it as they warm up, even if they've got pads. They'll go lumbar belt on, do some warm up, do 1 or 2 reps, belt comes out, unit comes out of the lumbar, straight up the top, go. 30 seconds to change over, there's no problem. Obviously, it's dependent on how many staff you have around, but we can move that pretty quick.
What's up, everybody? Taking a quick break from the show to talk about one of our sponsors, Hawken Dynamic. I've been using Hawken Dynamics ever since I was at Towson. Still utilize it today when I'm at the private sector at Goldfinch. Even brought the plates from Goldfinch over to Centennial to do some force plate testing with the football team there. We've done force plate testing with other high school athletes. It is something that you need to get. If you want more help with it about how to practically use it and you want to reach out to us, feel free to reach out to us at service@strengthcoachnetwork.com. Not only do I utilize it with lower body assessments, I use it with upper body assessments, plyo push-ups, prone Y assessments. You can also utilize it for what I call an upper body isometric mid-thigh pull, where essentially you're doing a push-up at the strongest range and you're pushing into an immovable force, so a barbell, same way you do an isometric mid-thigh pull. Like I said, been using them for years. Valid, reliable. The customer service is fantastic. Go check out Hawken Dynamic in the link down below, and you will not be disappointed. That's going to then be what I was going to say. That's going to be able to allow, doesn't matter whether AT, physio, strength coach, as long as you're on the same page with what you need to be doing, it can be, correct. Anybody can do it.
Correct. And I think, look, you'd be across this, Justin. I think we've talked about this before. I think in the US now, you're starting to see that gap between S&C and let's just say medical, AT, physical therapy start to close up. I had a magnificent talk the other day with an NFL team, which was super tight. Like they were all in the room together. That's what I want. We can't have that gap. I had a horror story last year from a team that you would know well. They brought a guy back from ACL surgery. The medical team handed him over to the performance staff. They did some run-throughs with him. They measured them all on SpeedSig. They literally rang me up and said, man, this doesn't look right. Can you look at the data? And sure enough, it was a patella tendon graft. The kid couldn't produce vertical force. My first thought and what I said to them was, you need to see if that patella tendon's symptomatic. So for anyone listening that doesn't quite get an ACL reconstruction, particularly with a patella tendon graft, they'll take the middle third of the patella out. But if you don't build the strength back up in that tendon, you can end up with insertional tendinopathy. So it swells, it gets sore. But when we run, what it means is they can't push vertically. And vertical force, overcoming the forces of gravity, again, I'll quote Peter Wayne, his work, brilliant in this space. If you can't overcome gravity, then you're not going to run fast. And so we were able to say to that group, you need to go back to the medical staff and tick off, have we got all the boxes ticked? But that communication piece between ATs, physical therapists, S&C coaches, all absolutely critical to performance.
What has been your most fun, without obviously with respect to, the companies and the different teams, don't say names, but what has been like the most fun story? Like you just said there, hey, they called you with this issue. What has been something fun where somebody's been like, hey, we use this, and man, like a success story or a couple of them?
Man, well, the best story, my favorite is, and I'll call him out because he's a great coach. I love him. Terrence Kennel down at University of South Florida, TK. He was one of the first guys I showed my system to back in a couple of years ago. Now, SpeedSig's currently in its 3rd generation. I wrote the first 2. The 3rd generation now is completely commercial. But the first 2, I showed him the first one. And the day I showed him, and I explained it, you should have seen his eyes light up. This was a guy who knew running. And as soon as I showed him, it was like, wow, I know what to do with this. And he's gone on to, he had one of the biggest ACLs I've ever heard of. Like, this was ACL, MCL, I think he did all the medial meniscus. He rehabbed the kid back to play last year, and he SpeedSig the whole thing, and he used it the whole way through. And just the conversations. He's about to write some case studies up, but I mean the day I saw TK light up was the day I went, right, I'm not talking to myself here. This is actually something people value, and from then there's been other guys. So there's other guys like TK around America, around the US, which I love working with.
I mean, I remember TK when he was talking about it on his episode, which is also linked down below for anybody that wants it. But TK was like, dude, we bought, like, correct me if I'm wrong. They either verbally agreed or paid you right away. They were like, no, they were like, we're getting this.
Yeah. So we sat down again. You talk about a unified group. We sat down with their head coach, head coach, S&C coach, and their head of medical. We sat down and went through it, and they just went, this fits what we're doing. And man, this is a short story, but when I talk to people who've never seen it before, I say, think of yourself like a caveman. Imagine the first day you saw fire. If I put fire in front of you like that, it'd be like shock. That's what SpeedSig's like. But then you go, oh, warm our hands. That's the second reaction. But the third reaction is people who start to connect the dots and go, hey man, if I throw wood on this fire, it's going to get bigger and we'll keep the saber-toothed tigers away and all that. But what it means in practice is we start to get people connect the dots and say, hey, we could do fatigue with this. We could do that, and all these things. And that was TK and Gio, the boy. They just lit up and went, we know what to do with this. And they have been arguably one of the easiest clients to work with, because anytime I get a phone call from them, it's like, let's just work on this. They might have an issue and we just work through it. They've been fantastic. But seeing someone's eyes light up like a kid on Christmas Day because they go, this fits my philosophy. And that's where I think we've been trying to work harder more recently, is helping people understand running. If they understand running, then they can see where we can go with this information.
The question then that I wanted to have is with respect to running. All right. Have you seen people then say, okay, I started using these specialized exercises in the weight room too, and then we saw this transfer? Like, how have you seen that with respect to healthy athletes or any injured athletes?
The healthy athlete one, we've seen predominantly with the younger athletes. So as we're trying to get them stronger and more resilient, we're able to see transitions from, remember I said before, we always judge against a normative data set.
Yeah, so and what does that normative data set come from?
So we generate it within the team, but we're also working at the moment to build, what we're building at the moment is a broader data set so that a client could say, hey, we want to look at our data versus NFL data or our data versus English Premier League, that type of thing. But that means we can see when a kid gets stronger, not just in the gym, but when they can apply it in running. And that's a big thing, right? Everybody talks about, you watch anything that Noah Lyles is said about Noah Lyles is, dude's strong, no question. But what he puts on the ground is more than anybody else. And that's what we're trying to achieve is, yeah, we want guys who are big, and yes, in football you have to deal with external forces. But the ultimate is, if you can put your foot on the ground and create a bigger impulse than anybody else, you go faster. And that's what we're trying to convey. That's what we want to see, that those things, whatever we're doing in the gym, conveys to the field. So yeah, we've seen that in healthy. And then the obvious one, the obvious, really easy one is the rehab cases. To be able to see a kid go from disparity that is massive to close that gap and get them back to something close to what might be asymmetrical, or maybe symmetrical rather.
What my head's starting to wrap around is like, okay, as you're in that rehab setting, right? Is it like, okay, we're really starting to notice that there is that difference, you know, are you then saying, hey, maybe as early as you can, PT, physio, rehab coordinator, strength coach, whatever your word is, start doing these regressed versions of things to avoid losing it?
100%. So I'll give you one, Justin. Here's one that I think, well, I'm going to say, certainly talking to Dan Pfaff, he agreed with me. So when we have a hamstring injury now, if I deal with a hamstring locally, the first thing we do as soon as that person can stand up is glute med, lateral pelvis control, standing up. Because what we see is that loss of hip lock, right?
So other people call it pelvic listing for anybody listening, right? Same thing, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Trendelenburg, pelvic listing, all of that stuff, hip lock. We do that straight away because you've got that, particularly bicep femoral, that lateral side, we get this inhibition, loss of function in glute medius. You get that from day one, you get on top of that, and you can get that kid back faster and more resiliently. We see it in, again, this is less so I see in America, but you have an ACL reconstruction. In Australia, they still take a bit of semitendinosus tendon,
okay.
right? And so then now you've got a knee injury and a hamstring injury.
Yep.
Okay. Now we see that all the time, this big pelvic list. And that was one of my biggest learning situations for me a couple of years ago. It was about my 28th ACL reconstruction. And I thought, yeah, we've got all this hip lock, but here's the data showing me that we don't. So we've got to improve, got to do more. I've got to be better at what I do, which is the point, right? You've got to, no matter how long you've been around, we've got to keep getting better. And that's what I built this to do, to make me better.
You talked about Dan Paff, and the thing that I just wrote down there to ask you was, how much have you then seen where Dan will talk about contralateral shoulders affecting the hip? Have you seen things of that nature, like, and dive down that?
Yeah, so I think there's a limit to how far we can go. Like what we can do, because we're at the pelvis, we can see what's happening at the pelvis, but there's no doubt that if you're, particularly when we start talking about rotation of the pelvis, so if you're standing up straight and you just push your right hip forward, so as your pelvis rotates, that's that pepper grinder effect. So your shoulders are going to do the opposite. Now, there's a metric that we use, which we just call economy. It's the classic physiological measure of just how economically are you moving. So that's a three-dimensional movement, total movement of the pelvis, right? So what happens is, yes, as we go faster, there's a certain amount of movement. But if you're getting more movement in your pelvis in total than everybody else.
What's up, y'all? Taking a quick break from the show to talk to you about another one of our sponsors, Vitruve. I've been utilizing Vitruve for a while now, and I absolutely love the convenience of this app. The encoder is at a price that you cannot beat compared to the competitors. Also, I don't personally like the camera apps. I've known that they continue to break down, and I really enjoy having this encoder attached directly to the bar. Vitruve does that. Not only does it do that, but it'll show me velocity loss during the set, shows me average velocity, all of it right within the app. Not only that, for the app on the individual athlete, there's a Vitruve Teams app where now as the coach, I can see all the results from my athletes. I can API that into my TeamBuildr, and now everything that I'm trying to do, get better competition, better intent in the weight room, I am able to do with Vitruve. If you want more information about them, click the link down below, or you can ask us questions directly at service@strengthcoachnetwork.com, and we would love to answer those questions for you.
That's a problem. And what we see with that is we see guys with bilateral adductor problems there, because when the pelvis is starting to move around, your adductors adductor longus and adductor magnus are trying to tighten to stabilize the femur against the pelvis. And then they can't do what they're meant to do, which is change direction and do all the rest of it. So they get cooked, they get overloaded, they strain. So there's no question. There's a level, like someone like Dan Pfaff and other guys I know, like Adam Larkham in Australia, great track coaches. Man, they go to a depth that is so much further down. Like their knowledge of anatomy is unbelievable. Their knowledge of biomechanics is even further. So I think at the moment what we're trying to focus on is trying to understand how much of that pelvic movement can we quantify, can we help coaches with, and does it contribute? That's the big one. Does it contribute to something that we can make an intervention on? Right? Now, one of the things we're looking at, go man, you have a question?
No, you're
good. We've just did a paper last year, so I've got the actual formal paper is currently in ethics committee at the moment. But we looked at, as the athlete lands, what does their torso do? How far does it pitch forward? Then as they take off, how much does it pitch? Now, what we're able to see, we did a group of American college football players versus Major League Soccer. The American college football players were clearly much stiffer and much more vertical, which you'd expect because they're more like sprinters. If you look at Brian Mann's work, if you look at his textbook, he details all of that because he did so much magnificent work, baseline data on total running. But what we're also able to identify is that guys who had major lower limb injuries, they also had more pitch on that injured limb. So my question to myself now is, when we look at pelvic stability and what that means, are we addressing enough in the sagittal plane with the point of as we land on the ground, as we take off? I think there's more to be done there, particularly. I don't know if you've come across a guy out of Finland, Johan Lahti. So Johan's done a lot of work with Jordan Mendeguccia and JB Morin and that group on hamstrings and speed. A lot of magnificent work up there. But he's also speculated in his papers. He's saying all of this different pelvic movement, frontal plane, sagittal, we need to understand that because if you increase the angle of your torso in the sagittal plane, so forward to backward, and you put your leg in front of you to put it on the ground, you're now increasing the length of the hamstring across and up and around your butt.
Yep.
And if you're doing that at speed, and that's at too bigger angle, that's widely speculated. That's
especially if you get into anterior pelvic tilt too, not only just the fact that you're dropping there.
Yeah. Correct. So you start to add all those pieces together. And if I look at I go back to, let's say, ACL reconstruction or a busted leg or something, I'm not specifically addressing those in any program. I think there's some general things I do, but do I need to be better in that space?
Have you noticed anything? Oh, sorry.
Probably yes. I think the answer is yes. I think there's a lot of things we could be better at.
The thing that I was asking, I interrupted you with, was horizontal resisted running. Has that been like are people putting it on and then they're starting to notice differences there? Like just thinking about questions that some of our listeners might be having right now.
Horizontal resist, so
like putting a sled on you, whether it's a sled, a 1080, any of that, and then noticing like big differences if they're going to pap it or whatever.
Yeah, man, 100%. So I actually wrote a paper on this recently, which maybe will circulate to your listeners.
Okay.
But one of the key things with that, particularly thigh angular velocity and your ability to exert horizontal force. So JB Morin paper on, I think it was 2011, technical application of force, was very, very clear that as you lose the ability to retain horizontal force, you start to slow down. Simple as that. Okay? So that's and so when you're trying to get an athlete to put more force on the ground horizontally, like they're already quite vertical, how do we improve it? One of the easiest ways to improve it and to improve the mechanics is light sleds. There's a lot of people do heavy sleds, but doing light, really fast sleds does one thing in particular. It keeps ground contact specific. If you slow ground contact down too far, it doesn't become running anymore. It becomes pushing, right? Now, I'm not going on there's an element of that for acceleration. But I think if we just stick with running fast, maximum velocity,
Gotcha.
You have to keep ground contact quick. But a light horizontal sled will do two things, right? It will, number one, force you to get your mechanics better. It forces the athlete to get front side, and it will force them to pull to the ground faster to increase thigh angular velocity. Right? It's what you would call constraint-based learning. Because you're putting that light resistance on, the athlete must respond. It's like running up a hill. If I run you up a hill and I ask you to hold the same speed, let's just pick a speed, 7 meters per second. So it's not obscene, it's not super fast, but you can maintain that on a gentle hill. To run up a hill, you have to create vertical force to get up, but you have to create more horizontal because you've got to get one step in front of and above the previous step. Same as when you run on a curved treadmill, right? So there's a perfect mechanism right there. Horrors, that resistance, that 1080 sort of stuff, sleds, hills, to create more pull on the ground, and maybe not so much even more pull on the ground, but better mechanics on the front side. So remember I said before there's a push-pull between kinetics and kinematics.
Yep.
If you improve the positioning of your foot to the ground, you will improve your horizontal force production. Because without going too much detail, but spring mass model dictates that if you get your foot closer to your center of mass at ground contact time, you've got less angle to deal with. So your hip is in a much better angle to create more force.
Yeah, and you have less braking forces because you're not out in front of you.
Yeah, that's right. It's a hard one to convey on a podcast, but yeah, that's exactly it, man. Your foot's not as far in front. Mate, there's Derek Hanson's got this classic graphic of a Charlie Francis, the yellow guy and the red guy. Yeah. The yellow guy is very, very steep. He's got hardly any, his ground contact's just in front of his center of mass, and the red guy's a long way out in front.
Yep.
And that's what we're trying to avoid. That's when you run with hills or slight sleds, you're forced to become more like the yellow guy.
What about assisted running, if anybody's wondering that and they heard you just say that?
Yeah. I'm old enough that I did resisted running back in my university days, back in the late 80s. I had a track coach when I used to be an athlete of some description say, hey, let's try this. We'll drag you with a rubber band. Mate, the rubber band snapped. I got hit in the crown jewels. Never again. Lucky, mate, I've had 2 kids, so I've been okay. But I think overspeed is the domain of, my opinion, the elite setup. So when you look at, I forget his name, the Italian guy who won the gold in the 100 2 Olympics back, you saw him running overspeed. He got in, they had a golf cart, a souped up golf cart with a wind cage around. He ran in the slipstream, so he had no wind resistance. Like that sort of stuff's the domain of the elite athlete. I think going overspeed, the number of times, I've got a guy just down the road from me, sells himself as a sprint coach. He's got a 1080 and he does overspeed with a few kids. And I just sit there looking, going, man, you're going to hurt somebody, because as soon as they start to pull them, the natural brake reflex comes in, and we get now this overstride, and now you've got overstride with more speed and a force pulling you. I think there's so much we could do without it, and I think if in the right hands and the right coaches, it's a thing. But yeah, it's not something I use a lot. Not since the 80s, mate.
What has been one of the opposite of like the best things where you're like, all right, this has been an awesome, like you talked about TK and you talked about that NFL team, the success stories. What has been something that you're like, man, you've heard or people have called you and you're like, okay, that is a misapplication. How can I make sure that, people don't do this? And the reason I ask that is when I was on job interviews and I advocate to other people is, hey, ask what are the 3 best things that I would do a great job in your eyes? All right, what are 3 things that I should never do that via negativa? Taking a quick break from the show to talk to you about one of our sponsors, Powerlift. I used Powerlift when I was at Harvard, Maryland, and the University of Iowa. I was also part of the staff that had the new weight room at the University of Iowa, the 32-rack, beautiful facility. I was a part of that. I also have Powerlift's equipment nowadays. Powerlift Strong, made here in the great state of Iowa in the great country of the United States. They're able to work with you on any customizations that you need, logos, height, whatever it is, the limitations that you have. Their equipment is strong. The people there, they're very good people. Check them out in the link down below. And if you have any questions on how to work with them, reach out to us at service@strengthcoachnetwork.com and we would be delighted to help.
Yeah. The biggest mistake I see is people moving outside of what I think we can do. I say very clearly where our limits are, and they are straight line running. When we start to get people going off tangent, I've had a few guys try to run curves, and also, hey, we put a sled on and can we measure the forces with that? I'm like, no, because the accelerometer responds completely differently. It's not a force plate, right?
Yeah.
If you put force plates or sensors in your shoe or something of that nature, you're going to see change in force. That's not what we're about. The way we estimate and the way we use a surrogate of force is looking at how the body center of mass changes. So the worst applications I see are when people go too fast and they don't understand the principles of what we're trying to do. Like that we fit into a very fine box that when it's used really well, it's a powerful source of information. But if it's not plug and play, mate. I'm not an iPhone. You can't just, you open an iPhone, everyone knows how to use it, right? Like it's just intuitive these days. We're not quite that. We're a new technology. Not only that, we're a new technology, but we're also a new body of information. Like in that, man, I'll ask you, Justin, like you know what ground contact is, you know what angular velocity is, you know what vertical. But have you worked with them every day? Do you know how they respond every day to training? You don't, because it's not something you've had, right? I'll tell you this, 2004, I was one of the first teams in the world to have a box of GPS units put on my desk. GP Sports 2004.
GP Sport, baby. Shout out Rod Lindell, my man.
Yeah, Rod Lindell. There you go.
My man.
I was head of the Wallabies performance. And I got them and I was like, and what do we do with these? But 20 years later, mate, they're ubiquitous. Everybody knows what to do with them. So what I'm saying is running mechanics, no matter who's doing them, are relatively new to everyone. When you start measuring them regularly and you can see how they interact, it's a new body of information because back in the day, did I know what sprint volumes were like? Did I know any of that stuff?
No, you kind of had an idea.
We were guessing, mate. We were guessing. Mate, guys like Rod, who was back down the Brumbies in those days and a few others, we'd all talk and go, hey, like we think, yeah, we'd love to have this information. But then you get it, and it's like first principles, just go one step at a time. So, yeah, with any running mechanics, anything, we try to educate our teams as hard as we can on the fundamentals, get the science right, understand what's happening, and then we can look at what differences there are in humans, because there are a lot of differences. Mate, they all do not fit into one, square box.
I remember hearing you say that about, can it measure different forces as if we're going to sprint with things? I remember when we had our GP Sports and Doyle was like, well, we're going to do speed, then we're going to lift, and we're going to condition. So like we can measure the total load that the players are going through. Like if they're squatting, I was like, no, because I was like, I don't think so. And I reached out to Rod. He's like, no, the IMU can't tell if there's 1,000 pounds on your back or if there's nothing. It just notices that you're going up and down, forward and backwards, right and left. So like that same question was asked and answered, but you brought up a good point because now you can start to see, hey, each athlete, their profile of how they're running over a microcycle, macrocycle, whatever you want to call it during pre-spring ball, during spring ball, post-spring ball, whatever your sport is.
Man, so one of I told somebody this the other day and I was shocked. My PhD was redacted, right? So I had it blocked off, so you can't see it. It's blocked for 20 years because I wanted to build something commercial out of it, right? But one of my chapters in the PhD was I looked at the movement of all these variables across a full season of AFL. So yeah, you can see, mate, the two big ones, ground contact time and frequency. When an athlete's fatigued, they drop off the face of the earth, right? When they bounce back up, they go again. So they're what you might call your neural factors, right? Like they're the ones that respond. If you're tired, frequency will go down because frequency
and you're going to be on the ground longer.
Yeah. 100%.
How big is the variance in it based off of the fact, like we're talking milliseconds. So like how big's your variance between fresh and fatigued on ground contact time based off of just a general set of athletes?
Yeah. So with all of that, I'd have to go back to actually the paper we got in publication now has all the standard errors on it, which elude me right now. Mate, I'm Alzheimer's. All this grey on my beard's very real, dude. So we have a standard error for all of that. But then what we do within each group or each individual, we'll model each player and create a 65 and a 95% predicted interval. All right. So we can understand if they move outside of what that model is when we tested them over 3 sessions. Or if they start to move outside of that model, then we go, hey, alert, there's a bit of a difference here. Let's have a look at it. So that's how we model it in the system and how we discern if there's a difference that's real. And that difference has to be outside the SEM.
Where do you want to see the next 3 to 5 years in strength and conditioning go?
Man, I think there's probably a couple of things. I think there's no question with my running bent. I would like to see people focused on running and resilience and making sure we can eliminate, like I'd love to see us eliminate some of these injuries that are costing players' careers, they're costing sports, they're costing teams. If we could understand them better, I'm not sure, like when you look at some of the Achilles stuff that's gone on in the NFL, not the crushing injuries. Like, I mean, there's been a few guys that get, slammed and they get this massive dorsiflexion. Like, man, it's a truck falling on top of you. What are you going to do? But some of the other ones where you go, really? Could we have known more about that? But the poor lad from San Francisco who's on the sideline going, let's go, and he takes off. I kind of feel like, is that our responsibility at some level? Like, put it this way, you and me as PhDs, we wear a little scientific badge there somewhere. Should we be trying to figure that out at some level? I'm like to say that I would love to say at some point, and I can't prove this, but what I'd like to be able to say is that we were tracking him via SpeedSig or something else, that we were able to detect something going on. And we could raise a flag to say, hey, let's get this guy 4 weeks ago. Something's gone a little bit wrong. He can't place as much vertical force on the ground. We've detected that. Let's do something about it. That would be my number one. Try and keep people on the park. I mean, the fact that in Australia, we've just finished our pre-season. Our AFL season starts next weekend, and there's already a bunch of players not playing because they're injured. Made big calf injuries, a couple of other big, there's a very good guy local to me, big hamstring. So he's just come off 21 days, went back to training, done another 21 days. So he's going to train in 46 days. That's if he gets back on time. He's going to train 4 times in 46 days before he plays. That's not sustainable.
No. Have you found similar with the ankle where you talked about not wanting to put force into the ground? Same apprehension when it's an Achilles?
I'm going to say less apprehension on the Achilles. The Achilles is more like once it seems like it gets back, it's the whatever elastic properties it's going to have post-surgery, they tend to go pretty well. What I thought you were going to say was, do you see the same thing with hamstrings? Yeah. As that hammy doesn't want to pull to the ground. They don't want to rip to the ground. And we see that drop. I remember seeing that drop the first time I ever saw it was on a hamstring tendon around about 2016. The first time I saw it, it was like, holy shit. Like
insertion or origin?
He had a muscular tendinous junction strain that got some tendon involvement in it. And so we had him scheduled for 6 weeks. So at day 16, 17, he'd basically regained all his strength, which is what tendons do. They bounce back relatively fast. He goes, I want to run. And I'm with the main session. I've got a radio on. My rehab guy rings me and says, hey, man, this guy wants to go. He won't stop for me. We got him to calm down. He maintained his targeted speed for that day, which was about 7.5 meters per second. But when we reviewed the data, his horizontal force had dropped right off. And I can only I can't prove it anyway, but I look at that and go, that's where a tendon fails. Because so many times we've seen over the years tendons fail about halfway through their rehab because they get their strength back, they exhibit, they feel good, but they haven't got the elasticity to handle speed yet. And so that's where I think we fail. So if we can, as a profession, stop that, understand more about the progression of those injuries and be more accurate, I think I'd keep people on the field, mate. Like, it's what we need to do. Keep guys on the park.
I think what this will help do is help coaches realize the realization phase. I remember Mike Wadango talking about it, where somebody back squats 500 pounds, and now we instantly think like, oh, that's what they do. It's like, cool, that was their 1RM, but they haven't routinely touched it. That is still foreign to them. It has not become realized. And I think this can help standardize, like, hey, there is not that standardization of their sprinting mechanics, that acute to chronic, whatever terminology that resonates with people to understand. It has not become the new norm for this population.
Well, mate, you read all the classic Zatsiorsky stuff. Like, there's a phase between once you've achieved something in the gym and when you can realize the potential of that gain on the field. It's not instantaneous, right? So making, as you said, making that 500 squat become more normal, but also taking that attainment of strength and transferring it to the field. And in a rehab case, that is a critical moment, because just because they did an isometric contraction on a force plate, and like you said, 3 seconds, let's say, then they got to go out and do 120 milliseconds on the ground. They're not equal, not even close. And people always get shocked when they say, well, how can you tell? What would you do? What would you look at your data? How would you convey that to what we do in the gym? I said, real simple, right? If we're looking at strength components, that kid's on the ground for 120 milliseconds. There's the data right there. That's where we see the asymmetry. Let's say we see what we call divergent data. So data that's together and then splits because they're weaker on one side. So let's say that point is about 7 meters per second, 120 milliseconds on the ground. You've got 120 milliseconds to train that kid. So when you go back in the gym, it's not about a squat that you could put VBT on and go, oh, okay, it's 1 millisecond, 1 meter per second rather. You've got to go faster because ground contact's way quicker. Therein becomes the specificity of drilling, and like you said, things like sleds and hills and all those things that have specificity, right? Because their ground contact is very, very close to what their athlete's going to do in the real world. All the other training's great, and we need that as a base, 100%. But we need to get towards specificity with as much accuracy as we can.
Amen. That's a perfect spot to wrap this up. It has been over an hour for the two of us talking. It is evening time for you. It's morning time for me. I appreciate you coming on and educating me again, man.
Mate, it's always a pleasure to have a chat, Justin. Thank you, man.
You're welcome. Talk soon.
Cheers, man.
Thanks for watching that video. If you enjoyed it, click right here for videos just like that, and make sure you click here to subscribe to our channel. Have a great rest of your day.